So let's look at the 3D viewer. We can access it also from the viewer integration toolbar. We can toggle the viewer on and off, and just like we do with the profile one, and I normally do the viewer where we draw the extents of the viewer. Drawing the extents of the viewer, you decide what's going to be in your 3D view, and you draw the box so that only that data that is within that box gets pushed into the 3D viewer. I'll go this off for a second. 3D viewer, I'm just going to pop it out so it'll be a little more prominent at the moment. Right? 3D viewer works very similar, where we could hold the left mouse button down and move the mouse, and that zooms us in and out on the profile or on the 3D viewer. We can right click and it'll rotate the view. So that was left to zoom in and out, right to rotate. We can hold both of them to pan. The ways of kind of setting that view up the way you'd like. Right, right to rotate. Just try to remember R, right, rotate. It's the only one that goes with anything. And then your left is zoom, and both is pan. And just like in the profile view, we have a scale, which defaults to a vertical scale of 1. If you hold Control and scroll your mouse wheel, then you can exaggerate or reduce the scaling depending on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to visualize in that view. If you notice in the map view, there is a box that's drawn that shows the extent. And there is a little arrow that's helpful so that if I rotate, remember right button to rotate, I can move the arrow around. I'm changing and I can see what my viewing angle is for that viewer. If I have a profile drawn, then I can turn on the display profile in 3D view, and it will draw the 3D box of the profile in the 3D view. And as I move it around, you'll see where that's located. So that's a way to kind of be able to keep track of how those two views integrate with one another. There is a tool that allows you to zoom. That's going to zoom the map view to fit the extents of the 3D view. So that's a way of getting yourself, if you're kind of moving things around, that's a way to find where this is set up and what's that viewing at the moment. That was zoom to viewer extent. Toggle off the profile box for a moment. So in the 3D view, then very similar to the other two views, we have a draw type or display legend that allows us to display by the different LIDAR attributes, right? And they work in the same way as the other views. So default is display by elevation. We can change to the third one, display by classification. It just depends on what you're looking at. There is one other one that is often handy in the 3D view, and it's called display by Gis Fusion. And display by Gis Fusion will work where if I go to the 3D viewer property, so that's the page with the hand on it, and go to symbology, Gis Fusion, if we had an image layer, I don't think it'll work with, yeah, it doesn't work with WMS layers, but if you had an image layer, you could tell it what the image layer was, and it would drape your color from the image onto the points. So if you didn't have RGB in the points, it'd be a way to drape that over. But with the other option is to use your data view, which is why if I do data view, it's draping my data, my map view, which is currently has coloration by point source ID. It's draping that over as a color. So you've got a couple ways to drape some information on the view. That's just for display. And that can be handy for some things. Rasters in LP360 there's a variety of raster types that you can add, which cover most of your standard raster types. So you can bring in a TIFF, you can bring in a SID, ECWs, IMGs. LP will handle those different types. We do this. This Gis Fusion is just a display mechanism. It will, not put the RGB values into the data, but we do have in development a tool that stems from our TrueView systems where we colorize. We can colorize the point cloud from an image, and with non-TrueView data, you'll be able to colorize the point cloud soon using the ortho image. So you could actually put the values into the point data, but right now Gis Fusion just allows you to drape it for display purposes. We display by classification. Just like in the other views, we could modulate by intensity. And so here, if we modulate by intensity, the road gets a little bit darker. And so we can see the road features. It could be also another way then to get some context to what we're looking at. You do in the 3D view, it is nice to be able to look at the tin, much the same as we do in the map view. So there is the same possibilities of displaying points or displaying points on tin. So if we select points on tin, it will create a tin because I've got everything on all points at the moment and display all the points. And if we change our filter here to say, use our ground with points that we set up earlier, now I'm tinning the ground surface and displaying the non-ground points only. So that can be also another very handy way of looking at the point information. That 3D view, is controllable by live view. So if I synchronize my live view, so it's live. So I'm going to switch to manual mode for a second. I'm going to switch to 3D. Uncheck the profile. Well, that's a bug. I went to manual. It should not have updated my display. I wanted to go to manual so that I could get things switched around to how I want that view set, and then refresh it, but it did it on its own. So we were broken there. It's always live at the moment. But here I'm displaying ground with points. I increase the point size to 2. And I've done that synchronizing in the 3D view. So that's another way you can control the view. You can, just the same as in the other views, if I've got that view synchronized and I turn off view 6, goes away my building points. Toggle that live to see the results. I'm gonna close that without saving. That was just, it was asking me to save because I was toggling a value there. Just like in the map view, it may make sense to display contours, I could control click on the contour button to bring up the contour, and I could then set maybe 1/2 meter contours and set the intervals or colors symbology I want to use for that. Throughout LP360, you'll often see buttons to be able to load and save. That means that I can save out an XML file of the settings and I can reload those XMLs. So if you find yourself always wanting to change those colors, I suggest you save a standard set of XMLs that you can use, and then you've got, say, I might save a half meter or half map unit XML for my contour, so I can just always reload that and I don't have to set it, right? So I can set my settings and then I can toggle on the contours. And just like in the map view, I have the choice of engineering contours or smoothing those contours a little bit. One thing I hadn't shown you is that, like I said, usually a button with a drop down often will also be a tri-state button. The way you see that is you see it highlights. And so the point display is also a tri-state button, where if I toggle the point display, then it turns the points off in the display, but doesn't affect anything from that level. So if I turned off something in the map or in the table of contents, it would remove everything associated with that. But if I just toggle the points off, that gives me a none view for my points. And that can be quite handy for doing different things. Just like in the profile view, if I wanted to change the symbology with the annotation, I would do that on my 3D viewer properties. And I get, like I said, control click on the button usually brings you to the page, or you can go to display properties on that view and then find the appropriate symbology that you're trying to modify. You get a couple different ways to get to it. Let me toggle off the contours. And if I'm going to show you one other display mode that I haven't shown you yet, and that's to draw by monochromatic. The display is monochromatic. And that just displays everything in a single color. And that can be useful sometimes when you're looking at some data and removing out kind of some of the differentiation that's monochrome display on it. Also help for like tin displays, just to not see the coloration from different classes, different uses for that. So that's the monochromatic option. Display back by class. The 3D viewer is really easy to get yourself turned upside down. And the best way, if you ever kind of get lost in your rotation and everything, this T means view it from the top. So correct everything back out, and that allows me to get back to a spot where it's okay, I understand where I'm at now, and I can reconfigure kind of what I'm viewing. There is a copy button in here, much same as with the profile view, where we can copy the contents of that to the clipboard and paste that into a document. One other tool that can be handy here is there is a axis that you can turn on, and so that when you're rotating and turning things around, that can help you understand kind of what direction you're looking at. That's what you're looking for. That's just the axes. The profile is limited, in its size, because if you've got a large amount of data, then it, you can have a lot of points to try to render in this 3D view. If I take, this isn't a very large data set. If I take and say, let's look at the entire data set in the 3D view. So I just redrew the extents of the 3D viewer around my whole map. Then you see the whole data in here. And now we're looking at some small percentage of the data because it's thinned it out using the pyramids for helping with the display and keeping things fairly quick. Sometimes you may find that you do want to look at all the data. You do want to take the time to do that. Then what's helpful is there's a button here, and there's the same button on the map view, and it's called Force All Points. I would just express a word of caution here that if you force 100% of points, it will try to load every point in the view. And that can take some time if you've got a very large data set, and you could run into some limitations. So if we force 100%, now it's looking at every point. See, it's 100%, right? We're looking at the bottom of the pyramids. We're looking at 100% of the data. This isn't a very big area, so it's not too bad. In fact, it actually makes for a little bit nicer display because we can see more points in the view. You get a better understanding of just how thick some of this vegetation is in areas. But in some data sets, that could be quite a bit. If you ever see in the bottom of the 3D window, it shows you the number of points and the number of points on the tin, much the same as it does in the the main LP360 toolbar. It provides you with some of that same information here. And that, if you look at our LAS layer properties, there's a performance option, and the performance option will tell you the number of points, maximum number of points in the tin, maximum number of points to retrieve and load from files for display. So this kind of controls what your maximums are. So if you ever see a TOVF, that means you've got a tin overflow. You're trying to load more points into your tin than the minimum, than what the parameters are here. Or if you see an OVF on the point side, that tells you it's trying to load more points to display in your view than what your limits here are in your performance options. These performance options are adjustable. They're set in default. They're actually the same old defaults from like the 30-bit, 2-bit software and ARC side of things. So there's just some, you can go in and you can adjust these. To give you an idea, support.geoq.com is our knowledge base, and we try to keep creating more and more articles on here to help users find tips, hints, workflow tips, whatever happens may be. And there are things on here that are it's searchable, so if you can look for things, and there's apparently options was not a good word to use because there's lots of options. Let's look at performance. There's an article called "Did You Know You Can Tune How LP360 Uses Memory?" And Lewis wrote an article here that describes in detail how you can adjust those settings to take advantage of more RAM if you're working with the 64-bit standalone here, and you're want to adjust those performance settings to be able to load and view more points. So that's something you can go to. Again, support.geoq.com. That's always a good reference if you're looking for any help and information on things. Always important to make sure to remember to uncheck the force all points when you're not wanting to use it, or if you're trying to zoom out, particularly when working with large data sets, because the with large data sets, if I go to zoom out to a whole area, especially if I'm trying to do something like drawing contours and displaying 100% of points, you could really bog things down as you're trying to retrieve a lot of information, display a lot of information at the same time. So usually if I'm zooming out or trying to pan around, I'll make sure that I don't have force 100% on, and I'll make sure that I turn off my contours, particularly if I haven't done the splitting of points and tin filters. So just something to keep in mind that can help speed up your navigation within the data sets. That's the, of course, there's a zoom all, fit to window, get you out in the viewer here. So that's the main components of the window, of the 3D window. Let me double click. I'm going to double click the title bar on the 3D window. That's going to dock it back where it was before I undocked it. So that's just kind of a little thing that you can do if you undock a window. Undock it, get it out of here. There we go. If you undock a window, double click the title bar, it'll put it back where it was previously docked. So this is called the viewer integration toolbar because there are some things that you could do, such as, we can see the profile box in the 3D window or in the map view by toggling these buttons here. One word of caution, if you are using both the standalone LP360 and the ARC version, in the ARC version, it doesn't have the ability to toggle on the profile. So if you toggle off in the standalone, it'll be off in your ARC version as well. There is a button for panning your viewer with the current profile. And so that's going to pan the 3D window. So if I recreate my 3D window, say, let's create something just small enough for the profile, then if I toggle on that button there, it centers the 3D window around that profile. And then if I scroll my mouse wheel in the profile window to move my profile along, then my 3D window will also move along. And if I scroll backwards, then that 3D profile will also scroll backwards. So it gives you some different ways to look at the data in each of the views at the same time. Section here. For some reason that's always escaped me, we're missing there's another tool that's supposed to allow you to move your map with it, but it doesn't exist in the standalone version. So you have to move that automatically. The other tool that can be quite handy is we're working with LIDAR data. We often have elevation. You sometimes want to do elevation clipping. If I want to see only the data, let me change my map view to display by class. And maybe I'll turn off my backdrop layer just to make things a little bit easier to see. These last three buttons on here are for enabling the clipping planes and for setting the clipping plane. So if I wanted to see only the data above a certain level, let me go ahead and draw a profile, maybe along my houses here. Then one option you have is to do something like set a clipping plane. And if you set the clipping plane, if you right click, there's two options. You can use an upper clipping plane and a lower clipping plane. If you use two of them, then you can grab the lower line and the upper line and set them at the desired elevation. And so I'm clipping to say I only want to see the data between those. So I set that in the profile. And if I want to see the results in the 3D viewer, I enable the clipping plane in the 3D viewer. And now I'm only seeing the data that is at the elevation between those. So between these two elevation values. And I can do the same thing in the map view. So now I'm only seeing the data at that elevation. So that's another way to kind of clip and adjust so that we can just see the value, just the points in the view that is at elevation. So it's a horizontal, it's a horizontal clipping based on, clipping of the view based on elevation. And then if you want to go back to viewing all points, you just uncheck those in the two views. That turns off utilization of those clipping values. And we can just different tool. There we go. We just pick on a different tool in the viewer integration toolbar. It'll turn off the lower and upper clipping planes. So again, that clipping plane, to set it, you enable the clipping plane, right click to decide if you're using both an upper and a lower or one or the other. Just use a lower clipping plane if you want, and then you toggle what views that's displayed in. So now I'm only looking at data that's above that line because it's my lower clipping plane. And I just toggle those off. To get off the setting of the clipping plane, you just pick a different tool in the view integration toolbar. So that's how we can utilize the three views together. And again, a reminder on the live view, which can control the contents of the different views. That's done through what views you have synchronized at the time that you do the set the viewing. Set your options. Typically, it's in live mode. You're supposed to be able to toggle the manual mode and make changes and then apply those. But as I showed, it just didn't seem to be working in my version at the moment. So. Questions on the views and integration of the views?